if I want to convince my uncle that like burning a Tesla is in some sense conducive to anything in terms of like a socio-ecological transformation, I think that needs to be paired with some cultural work. I don't think the questions that we need to be asking right now is like more or less disruptive action. I think it's definitely, I mean, both of those, but also making things in some, like creating the cultural conditions to make that legible. And to me, that is in essence pushing for things like, community kitchens, agroecological farming, all the positive things that to people you can immediately see this is something good, like libraries of tools, like more deliberative democracy, more places where people can meet in person and decide their own futures, more local councils, more municipalism. I don't think it's just a question of more or less disruption. I think it's a combination of that plus the positive work that we need to be doing, including as scientists and as academics.
Hello and welcome to Planet Critical, the podcast for a world in crisis. My name is Rachel Donald. I'm a climate corruption journalist and your host. Every week I interview experts who are battling to save our planet. My guests are scientists, politicians, academics, journalists, and activists. They explain the complexities of the energy, economic, political, and cultural crises we face today, revealing what's really going on and what they think needs to be done. These are the stories of the big picture. Go to planetcritical.com to learn more and subscribe. My guest this week is Fernando Racimo. Fernando is an associate professor at the University of Copenhagen, where he studies evolutionary genetics. He's also the author of Science in Resistance, the Scientist Rebellion for Climate Justice, which he joins me today to discuss, detailing the history of Scientist Rebellion, his own involvement in it and that of the many scientists that he interviews for the book, the future of the movement, and how our universities need to change from the roots up in order to be effective agents for heralding a new world. This is an extraordinary conversation. I so enjoyed it. We begin with discussing Fernando's research, where he explains how the very DNA of creatures all around the world is being impacted by a changing Earth. He then explains the process of knowledge production in universities, how dissociated they are from the reality, and why that led him to joining Scientist Rebellion. This leads us to a fascinating conversation about activism and effective action, with both of us calling for what we euphemistically described as more disruptive actions. And Fernando then also explains that we need more generative actions, giving examples from around the world of really extraordinary protest movements that have embodied what could be. Occupied universities, occupied factories, spaces that then became hubs for embodying a different kind of politics, a bottom-up politics that prioritizes social justice, climate justice, earth justice, and political justice. We recorded this during COP30, and as I'm sure you are all aware, asking politely simply hasn't worked. So whatever we want, we're going to have to build it ourselves. And we're going to have to dismantle a couple of things in order to do it. I hope you all enjoy the episode. If you do, please share it far and wide. And if you're loving the show, become a patron on Patreon or support Planet Critical with a paid subscription at planetcritical.com. By signing up, you'll get the Planet Critical newsletter delivered straight to your inbox every week. You'll also have access to the wonderful Planet Critical community, who are full of inspiring thoughts, ideas, critiques, and determination. The links are in the description box below. I'm so grateful to everyone who chooses to support the project. I'm a vehement believer in ad-free and open access content, so Planet Critical wouldn't exist without the direct support of the amazing community. Thank you so much to all of you who keep the project going every week. Fernando, welcome to Planet Critical. It is a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
Now, I've asked you to join me today to discuss the Scientist Rebellion movement, which we have previously discussed on the show. I've had other members of the movement from different parts of the world involved to come on and explain what's happening. Obviously, the political climate has changed dramatically since the movement's inception some years ago. But if you could take us back to the beginning, how was it that you first got involved? And why did you think it was so important to join an activism movement alongside your work?
So I come from academia. I'm a natural scientist. I was originally trained in biology and evolutionary biology. But like many people, I was involved in sort of these mass mobilizations of 2018, 2019. And like many academics who are now part of the movement, I was also realizing that scientists were not there, at least in their role as scientists. And several of us in the country where I work, in Denmark, we're seeing, like we're driving all these people into the streets. This is what one of the people in the movement, Charlie Gardner, has said. We're driving all these people into the streets as scientists, but we're not there. Like, with it's not very convincing if scientists and academics are not joining. So I joined the movement around 2020, 2021. We did an action in Denmark as sort of a teach-in where we performed sort of an academic classroom, a lecture about climate change while blocking a street in front of the climate ministry here. And since then, I've been involved in various roles in the movement, both at an international level, but also here in Denmark and Sweden.
And just to clarify, is there any part of your research that specifically focuses on the impacts of, I don't want to say the climate crisis, but the Earth systems crisis, to give us as broad a look as we can?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to think of an academic discipline that is not somehow touched by the intersecting crisis that we're living through, the intersecting systems of oppression that we're under. So my field is evolutionary genetics, more specifically. So I study how genes have evolved over time, and it's also about studying how populations today of various organisms, how they're going through the major changes that they're experiencing. How does that reflect at the genetic level? And of course, it is a sixth mass extinction, so there's massive declines in genetic diversity that we're observing as geneticists. But that being said, I did not join the movement from that particular perspective. I joined the movement because, like most scientists, most people out there, we see there's massive catastrophic climate ecological breakdown, societal breakdown. So it came more from a more human or emotional side rather than my particular scientific discipline.
I would just like to stay with your particular scientific discipline, though, for a moment, because I've recently done a bit of research for my book looking into how just examples, essentially, of our more than human kin are being affected by warming oceans, warming temperatures, whatever it is. And I was really astounded, actually, to look into it, to read about mass mortality events, which are when a huge percentage of a species dies off in a short period of time. And these are rapidly increasing because of climate change, and climate change is now the number one driver of these things. I mean, there's so much death and destruction going on in the more than human world all the time, and it's changing. Like, I write about an example where scientists are in Australia. Is it Australia? But are worried that a species of dragon is going to go extinct because in warmer temperatures, essentially they don't produce male and females. They switch to just the one sex, and so they're not going to be able to reproduce themselves. This is really frightening stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of these examples of sort of non-linear effects where it's like you think that, like a species might move up north because of the change in temperature, but there's a lot of biological factors that affect the species beyond the particular temperature and the geographic environment they're in. It's also the fact that a species might be more vulnerable to climatic changes than we are aware because of previous episodes of decline. So like the genetic diversity in a more than human organism might be much lower than it would need in order to continue persisting over time. So a lot of species might be already at quite a critical level. So yeah, it's tremendous. And to me, the fun thing is, as ecologists, as evolutionary biologists, we're studying this mass killing of the more than human world, and our response to that is, we're just going to study it some more. We're going to create models of how this mass killing will evolve over time under different scenarios. It's also like, we're going to maybe politely ask those in power to pretty please stop the mass killing, or we're going to ask them for money to continue studying the mass killing. So it's an amazing contradiction to me, and it's also part of my reason I'm joining the social movements. Doing science today, including doing evolutionary genetics, most sciences today, particularly in natural sciences, it's a little bit of a batshit crazy endeavor. It's you have to live with this sort of double reality. Some scientists, activists have called this sort of the double reality of academia, where you're able to study this horrific process that is unfolding in excruciating detail, and like with a lot of technical expertise, a lot of technological instruments to understand how this is happening. I mean, for genetics, it's like mass amounts of sequencing machines. There's like all these projects to like record the genetic diversity of as many species as are possible before they disappear. And very little is being done to actually stop the mass killing from the root causes, right? So yeah, it's quite strange. And I think maybe social movements to me is the antidote to this. Participating in social movements like gives you a little bit of a perspective, like we can do more than being passive observers of all this mass killing, of this massive declines in genetic diversity.
There's an interesting parallel coming to mind of just the reality of living in a post-truth world where even the truth doesn't really amount to any sense of momentum or capacity to act, because it's almost as if reality is shaped by a different narrative. So those of us that sort of live in a world where the facts present themselves, it's still impossible to actually move and do something because the world is so set up by a set of non-facts. And perhaps that's not clear, but I just keep thinking about how much information keeps coming up about, for example, Donald Trump, or how much evidence we have seen of the destruction in Gaza, and just nothing changes. And it's not even anymore that, these men sort of deny these things anymore. It's just that the world that they have constructed, because they are so close to the seats of power, is untouchable, essentially, by those of us who live in the world of facts, it seems.
Yeah, this to me resonates with this phrase that Charlie Gardner uses, one of the most sort of prominent members of SR, is that we say often knowledge is power, but no, it's power that is power. And the central thesis of a lot of academics and scientists today, that we just need to be better at providing scientific knowledge. We just need to be more clear. We need to be able to express ourselves better so that people understand better, and that somehow leads to change. I think that is a very flawed theory of change. I think what we need to be doing is, first of all, organizing ourselves better. And also, in terms of gathering knowledge, I think we should be gathering knowledge about how to better organize, how to better resist against those sort of trying to perpetuate the mass extraction, the mass extinctions, learning from the past, and also learning about all these different actors who are driven by extreme drives to profit making, are driving the mass killing. So I think one of the things that I try to argue in my book, that sort of a first thing that we need to do is acknowledge some form of failure as people that at least see ourselves as knowledge gatherers and knowledge providers, with all the limitations that has, and all the problematics that has, like sort of scientists as the only knowledge providers or knowledge givers. I think we need to acknowledge how much we failed at connecting our knowledge, whatever knowledge we've gathered, to any kind of global policy change, and realize that perhaps it's not there that we should be looking at. It's building counterpower. It's talking to our communities where they are. I don't think Trump is not going to read the next report on declines in genetic diversity and go like, yeah. So I think it's a very different type of activity, and a very, very different type of communication that we should be engaging in as any kind of knowledge gatherer, any kind of knowledge transmitter.
I have to say, I'm not sure if I entirely agree with you. I do think there needs to be more of different kinds of communication, and I do think we all need to remember that facts are not what change people's minds. Being told something new by someone they trust, that's what changes people's minds. But I do think that even if, in the darkest of possibilities, that none of the information that is being produced now actually amounts to change, at the very least, it will be a form of archive for the future, because we do need to bear witness to what is happening. We do need to bear witness to the destruction and the death. And it is so important to have that on file for when we finally move past, sort of white Europeans and our descendants sort of continual flirting with fascism and authoritarianism. And I believe we will break the cycle one day.
Yeah, I mean, to a certain degree, yes, I agree. But I mean, we do have limited amounts of times and resources in terms of like dedicating what amounts to like a huge amount of time and resources that we have in the many privileged positions we have here in the global north, and in many different sort of professions that we have. I think, sure, recording the mass killing is a task. I don't think it's the biggest task ahead of us right now. I mean, it's also. I think there's more than we can do than bear witness, and I think it's crucial to bear witness, absolutely. But I think there, reality is a lot more malleable than we've been trained to believe. I think part of the project of you know fascism, capitalism, colonialism is part of a project of forgetting that we can do more about our surrounding reality than we're really able to by collectively organizing. And I think that there's an argument there that there's a lot more than we could be doing right now beyond beyond sort of bearing witness and transmitting information to those around us. And I think it's that sort of process of conscientization of realizing, wow, there is quite a lot I can do within my local community, within the social movements that exist out there. It's something that we can help other people do, like hold their hands as they enter a world that they can see as a sort of transformable and changeable. I think this is sort of like one of the central theses of like Paulo Freire. That's like it's about making people realize that you can change the world. So teaching them that they are powerful actors in the world by holding their hands and saying, like, you're more than just an absorber of knowledge, an absorber of the news. You can be a much more powerful agent engaging in collective action
on the ground locally.
Yeah, on the ground, in coordination with movements around the world. I think there's a lot of roles that are out there, and I think there's something that a lot of movements today are sort of trying to strategize and figure out. Well, is it about sort of knocking doors and learning about what are people's real needs in the here and now? I think this is something that,
yes,
for example, the New York socialists have been very successful at doing in the very recent times. So like meeting people where they are and seeing like what are their local needs, but also, and I think this is also quite crucial, realizing that we're all interconnected like networks of exhaustion. I really like this this book by Ajay Singh Chowdhury. It's The Exhausted of the Earth. How like we're all in the same sort of network of exploitation and exhaustion, whether you're an Amazon warehouse worker or a slave in a coal mine in Congo. We're all connected by the fact that we are angry and exhausted and tired and many senses sad. And I think that's something that we can deploy. We can sort of deploy that towards activating and expanding our movements. The major corporations and states around the world, in some sense, they're doing some of the work for us by connecting us to these interlinked systems of exploitation.
Okay, how?
What do you mean? Like
how do we build let's say we built the move. I think it's fair to say that the movement has been built in many different chapters of the world. There's definitely lots of different movements. There's also a huge sort of green movement, let's say, around the world. And in Latin America, for example, it's very interconnected to political justice and social justice. So a lot of the intellectual work has been done. And a lot of the networking has been done, and a lot of attention has been raised. And things are getting worse. So what do we actually do to make these movements effective enough to bring down the current power relations that are facilitating this mass death that we were talking about?
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of, as part of that is the answers of learning from movements in the global south that have been able to, at least in their local environments, stop. Like there have been some quite big successes in the global south to stop the fossil machinery. And in my book, I talk about, for example, the Yasuni struggle, this massive tropical forest under which there's like tons and tons of oil. It's been exploited for several decades, first by Chevron and then by the state oil corporation in Ecuador. And the way that was stopped, it was stopped just a couple of years ago, was a coalition of indigenous groups that were living in the area, Waorani groups, but together with worker groups, student groups, scientists, SR was present there, mounting resistance in many different ways. And that included, the sort of classic civil disobedience, direct action, but also legal battles, and also much more disruptive things than sort of nonviolent civil disobedience. And I think exploring a diversity of tactics, as movements in the global south are doing. And another example of this, a very current one, is the sort of Tia Maria megamine in Peru. It's like under massive pressure to open this megamine, a massive resistance against this, and it's quite powerful what is being done there in terms of resisting and building a better world. And I think it's learning from the past, learning the many diversity of tactics that are out there. And I think building the movement, I think especially under increased conditions of fascism, is about learning there's more that we can do than just gluing our hands to the road or being on a march from point A to point B. So looking at diversity of tactics and seeing how they can be combined together. It's also looking at points of confluence between different struggles and looking at territories. So a really good example to me is this GKN factory in Italy that was recently occupied by its own workers who were fired en masse by this auto parts factory. They turned the factory into a solar panel and bike factory after occupying it. And they were very good at showing that the occupation was both a labor struggle, but also an environmental struggle and a social justice struggle. So finding those places where on a particular place you can find a confluence of different struggles to come together.
Here's the thing, though, right? You mentioned Ecuador. The thing that I worry about when we discuss examples like these is like fixing them in a moment in time, because Daniel Nubo is the president of Ecuador again. Frankly, I think he stole the election because I was there on election day and the votes were counted after 4 hours, which is astonishing given that so many of them were flown in from the Amazon because there's a huge number of indigenous people voting in really rural, remote communities. He is in bed with Donald Trump. He visited Mar-a-Lago just before the election. America has made, some deal to sort of send military or whatever. And he pretty openly plans to rip up the rainforest in order to search for more minerals and more oil and all of this kind of thing. And so these wins, I feel, are only temporary stopgaps until we tear down the infrastructure that is facilitating power to accumulate, which is capitalist infrastructure and energy infrastructure, centralized energy infrastructure. And that doesn't just mean fossil fuels, quite frankly, because we know that the destruction that mining for renewable, quote unquote, supply chain minerals is doing all over the world. And so for me, I'm curious as to when the movement is, and I mean all movements, are going to perhaps, and I say this all the time on the show, but like confront the fact that it's not just a sort of ideological thing that we're up against, but actual physical materials. I mean, infrastructure in the very literal way. And when are we going to take it down?
Yes, that's a question I also ask myself quite often. I mean, it's sort of like I like the phrase from Andres Malm. It's like the need to strand the assets that need to be stranded. I feel like, yes, I think that doing that is also crucial. And there's been examples of dismantling of infrastructure. I mean, as close to Europe. I mean, maybe not so much in the context of fossil fuels or rare earth minerals, but in the context of like weapons manufacturing, like Palestine action, like the dismantling of factories there, and also massive repression from the state against that, because in some sense it was quite a threat to the supply chain for the Israeli death machine. So yes, I do agree that we should start with the strand the assets quite soon. I think it's a challenge to see how to do that. This is something that is explored quite a bit in a book I would highly recommend. It's called Insurgent Ecologists, and part of the issue is, I mean, it's not just about like when do we start or whether we need to start, but like who does the starting and how. Because I mean, sort of I think the push for this more disruptive types of tactics that maybe are like not the safest to talk in a podcast, but the disruptive types of tactics that can like lead to quite a lot of repression. It's also, one needs to make them palatable to the people that might become those who do the repression if those things start to happen. So I think the dismantling, the undoing of all the things that need to be undone needs to be coupled with the creation of the worlds that will replace the fossil economy and sort of the exploitative capitalist economy. So I think coupling,
big ask.
Well, so is the first thing, right? Yeah. So, but I think it's also it's such a big challenge, like a hyper securitized world. Like how do we start dismantling this? So yeah, I think this is the challenge for a lot of the climate movement, and broadly a lot of social movements out there. Uh, how do we start doing it? I do think there is some cultural work that needs to be done in advance of that. I run this study circle on exnovation, basically on the technical, the quantitative questions about how to most quickly and safely undo a coal mine or an oil rig, in a way to start discussions about the how rather than the if. And I think that's something that maybe universities could play a big role, right? It's like providing courses, providing academic programs on exnovation, on undoing all the things that need to be done, because like the very mainstream scientific reports, the IPCC report, tell us that they need to be undone. So I think this is something that I briefly mentioned towards the end of my book. I think it's also important to rethink what we're teaching, and if we're teaching in the university to perpetuate the fossil economy, maybe that's also something that needs to be changed. I think part of the material undoing of the fossil economy to the level of the structures, the material structures, needs to be at the very least something that we should be allowed to talk about. And I don't think we're there yet, and that's why I think there's still cultural work that needs to be done to get there.
Just before we head down that, because that is where I want to go next with you. I am very curious as to the increasing repression that we're seeing in weird countries, Western educated, industrialized, rich, democratic, quote unquote, because I think that ironically enough, they are creating the conditions for more destructive tactics. Because if people are going to be arrested and potentially thrown in jail for holding up a sign, then why shouldn't they up the ante and do more? It's very difficult now to save your own skin or protect your body in any way and participate in any meaningful action. And so if you're not leaving this sort of like safe buffer zone for action that we accept and action that we condone and action that is permissible within a democratic society, if you erase that, which is what Starmer's Labour government has done and Trump's government has done, then what's stopping people from ratcheting up a couple knots? Nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that sort of the states with increasing repression are sort of kind of creating the conditions for more disruptive action. Is the sort of people are sort of put into a corner. I do think that you can still have a ton of cultural work to prevent that disruptive action from happening. I mean, you can have entire states under quite heavy conditions of fascism with very little damage in terms of the sort of this material economic structures that power the state itself, right? So I do agree that maybe it might lead to groups of people doing things like what we're seeing in the US, is like burning Teslas, sort of in protest of Elon Musk and sort of extractivism of his companies. But I still think that like you need to make whatever you do legible, and I don't think like if I want to convince my uncle that like burning a Tesla is in some sense conducive to anything in terms of like a socio-ecological transformation, I think that needs to be paired with some cultural work. I don't think the questions that we need to be asking right now is like more or less disruptive action. I think it's definitely, I mean, both of those, but also making things in like creating the cultural conditions to make that legible. And to me, that is in essence pushing for things like community kitchens, agroecological farming, all the positive things that to people you can immediately see this is something good, like libraries of tools, like more deliberative democracy, more places where people can meet in person and decide their own futures, more local councils, more municipalism. I don't think it's just a question of more or less disruption. I think it's a combination of that plus the positive work that we need to be doing, including as scientists and as academics.
But I think it's fair to consider those things that you just listed as disruptive technologies or disruptive actions as well, because as you say, there's sort of allowing people permission to exist out with, to imagine out with the confines of the current system. Finding ways to take their capital elsewhere, their time elsewhere. I mean, it is hugely, hugely, hugely rebellious, which is why so often these schemes are targeted as a form of insurgency, essentially, and deliberately shut down. Like I always think of the COVID example in the United Kingdom when the Conservative government attacked the mutual aid networks that were just organically springing up between people in communities. And I think maybe this is it. Like, whatever happens, it needs to be disruptive, because actually taking to the streets and just blocking traffic, it's not disruptive to the system, quote unquote, in any way. It's not disruptive to power. It's not disruptive to capital. And so that's why these things can happen and then just be ignored. And so this, like, the tactics do need to change, whatever happens.
Yeah. I mean, I like to bring the example. I mean, to me, the Palestinian encampments were a really good example of that. Not for the demands that they were making to universities, but to the way in which they carried out the everyday practices of the camp. They were like a great example of prefiguration. So I think they were extremely disruptive to the universities that were hosting them. And in many cases, for example, in my own university in Copenhagen, that they led to the demand of the investment to be satisfied, because it was like a massive PR nightmare for the university to have a camp. But I think the most powerful thing that they were doing in the camp was the fact that they were running their own university within the university in a way that was much more horizontal, much more based on practices of mutual aid. They were cooking their own food. They were cleaning after themselves. They were rotating rules. They were hosting documentaries, lectures by Palestinian scholars, by pro-Palestine groups, doing even sort of the academic work that the university had failed to do in the lead up to this. And showing people, like, it's a sort of a great example of prefiguration. This is one way in which we could be running our universities, and we're not. And that makes our universities worse for that. That makes our universities much less engaged in the crisis, the injustices of our time. So I think, yes, occupying spaces and prefiguring the future that we want is super crucial. And I think that can happen while blocking a road. I like to bring up this example of the classroom that I mentioned earlier, because it wasn't just that in that action we were just disrupting the everyday life of whoever was trying to pass through that street. I think we were showing a lot of people that would participate in that classroom, look, our streets could be classrooms. Like, we could have open air classrooms where we discuss like amazingly interesting or fun things in a much more quiet environment than what we've made our cities to be in the last few hundred years. And it would be amazing. Like, cities don't just have to be for cars. Like, there's other things we could be doing in our cities. So I think blocking a road by itself, it's not conducive to change. But I think blocking a road opens up, or occupying a space opens up possibilities, opens up spaces for prefiguration, for showing people there's other ways in which we could be conducing our lives. There's other worlds out there that we could be exploring, other ways of being and doing and acting and thinking.
What's this word that you're using? Prefiguring?
Yeah, so that's sort of like enacting the change you want to see in the world, sort of practicing the change that you want eventually to be practiced by broader society, right? In the case of the Palestine encampments, it was like a case of prefiguring a world in which there are no hierarchies in the university, in which everybody's sort of like a student and a teacher, and we're all like sharing tasks in a democratic way. We're practicing deliberative forms of democracy. So showing the world what change we want to enact in the world.
Do you really think there shouldn't be any hierarchy? Like, I can't imagine a functioning university where students think they're on the same intellectual level as their teachers. What's the point?
So I guess I should say a lot less hierarchy than what we see in the universities today. There's to me, especially in Europe, and I would say especially in countries like Denmark, universities have become extremely hierarchical. And this is a fairly recent process. I've been digging into the history of my own university, and just like 20 years ago, most of our management was actually elected by faculty and students, and now it's largely picked by boards that are largely made up of politicians and corporate leaders. But I think we don't have to go that deep into the past to see universities that could be run otherwise, and where like whatever hierarchies are there are hierarchies that are answerable to those who run our institutions more broadly than just our universities, right? So it's sort of like the Zapatista motto of like sort of, the governing is sort of obeying the people and being mindful of that. I would say it's also, even though, I mean, there is some hierarchies that are established by sort of accumulation of knowledge, by people transferring knowledge from one place to another. I do think there's ways of running our classrooms at the more micro level beyond sort of the general hierarchies of universities that could be a lot more participatory. And honestly, I've learned so much about activism, about social movement transformation from people that are younger than me, from students that just did the work of learning about social movements in the past, than I've learned from people that are either my same age or older and in much higher positions in my university. So I think, yes, there maybe some hierarchies should exist for practicing some forms of activities, but I think we're nowhere near where we need to be in most of our institutions today, and that's part of the problem. People just see themselves as following orders rather than trying to enact sort of build the institution in which they're in. Yeah.
Like a context-dependent hierarchy. Like if, for example, if you and I were on a stage, nobody should listen to me about evolutionary biology, and that's okay. But that doesn't mean that you get to be treated as being above me off of that stage, or when not discussing evolutionary biology.
Yeah, like and the permanence of hierarchies, right? Like hierarchies don't have to exist. The hierarchies that exist today don't have to be the same ones as tomorrow.
Exactly. Let's keep digging into the institutions, because you write about this in your book, about how institutions are complicit in the crisis. And it's this double reality, I think, as well, of what you're talking about. Not only are you studying the thing and not able to do about the thing, but you're taking money off of the thing in order to study the thing that you don't want to happen. And I mean, can you tell us more about essentially what you've discovered through being involved in this movement, and how deep does the rot go?
I mean, I guess there's quite a lot of rot. There's also a lot of potential within this institution, but let's start with the rot. So in one part of the book, I try to explore sort of academia, the structural incentives for passivism in academia. What makes people not participate in social movements? What makes scientists, academics, not want to be participating in social movements? I would say there's quite a lot of fear in academia about what you can and cannot do, and that sort of deters people. So often, we go to the sort of rational arguments as to why participate in activism or not, should scientists be neutral? Is there any such thing as neutrality in science, or will we lose our credibility by participating in social movements? But as many of the activists I interviewed stress, I think there's much deeper incentives to be passive in academia, and that has to do with the way academia, universities have been structured over the last few decades. Through a process of neoliberalization, precarization, there's quite a lot of incentives for hyper competition, for managerialism, for being told what to do rather than deliberating together what we want to do, and also a lot of obsession with metrics for things that can be quantifiable. And obviously, participating in social movements, transformational change is not that particularly quantifiable. So people feel scared, and obviously they in a capitalism, you need a salary. So if you're a scientist, you want to at least protect that source of your salary, and that keeps people in sort of their narrow confines, also the narrow confines of their own silos, their own sort of little field of expertise, and preventing them from engaging in action. There's a really good book. I mean, this has been discussed for many decades. There's a good book called Academic Capitalism that talks about the various ways in which universities have, over the last few decades, been plugged into systems of profit making. So it's not like universities are corporations themselves, but they're working in many ways in the service of corporations. In some cases, yes, corporations are almost indistinguishable. But I mean, there's a university in my country that had like different departments have CEOs, like literally CEOs that run them. So in some cases that it's actually mutating to that. But even universities where the nominal roles look like sort of traditional university roles, I think they have been structured to serve profit, and I think they should be transformed to serve people and planet. There's also the more explicit ways in which capital is sort of influencing academia. There's like, it's just the example in the UK in 2022, there's over 44 million pounds going into UK universities from fossil fuel corporations. That obviously influences the curriculum, influences what research gets practiced. In one chapter of my book, I mentioned a university in Denmark where Total has been signing deals with this university to establish a center for oil and gas to figure out how to better explore for oil. Also to greenwash its own activities, because fossil fuel corporations can say, now we have these partnerships with universities, we're creating knowledge. and also through more subtle means by just putting people that used to work in a fossil fuel company into some sort of faculty role or academic role that then influences policy. There's also been a lot of student resistance against this. There's many examples in Spain and the Netherlands of like students occupying their universities in protest of the many deals that universities make with fossil corporations and with other types of extractive corporations.
Mm.
Can I add one more? I mean,
Of course
I've been
can.
focusing on universities, but there's another activist that I interviewed who he used to work for a very prominent publishing company, Elsevier. It's like publishes like so many of the most prestigious academic journals in the world. He was working for it, and this company advertises itself as being like sustainable and green. And he started digging into whether that was actually the case, and he found the company and its parent company, Relics, was doing all kinds of things that were like atrocious. So they help organize conventions for fossil fuel corporations, for mining corporations. They create software to help companies find where to best extract oil and gas. They the parent company Relics has actually funded a lot of climate denialist politicians in the U.S. Congress, and this is the same corporation that is sort of publishing journals like Cell, like the Lancets, like in which a lot of articles are published about climate change, about the need for action, and yet the company that is doing the publishing is like completely contributing to climate and ecological breakdown. And I think that's something that needs to be called out. This particular employee eventually got fired for digging so much into the company's own workings. The company just couldn't bear that. It to me it's not just the universities, it's not just the research institutions, it's all the other institutions that scientists and academics also work with.
Well, it's sort of all of the institutions, isn't
It's
it?
all, yes. I guess I'm taking the position. Academics, we like to think that academia is all there is in the world. So I'm taking that particular perspective in my book. But yes, I agree.
Fernando, this has been so interesting. Thank you so much. I can't believe how much information you've given us in such a short period of time. We've already we've spoken about, we've had a bit of back and forth about what the movement needs to become, but that was sort of specifically around disruptive action. Is there anything else you'd like to say about the future of not just scientist rebellion, but other rebellion movements, other liberation movements around the world?
Yeah, so I mentioned this connection, this example of GKN, this factory where labor and environmental struggles are connecting. I think that's absolutely crucial, like reactivating our unions, radicalizing our unions, academic unions, but also all other unions. And there's wonderful examples in Italy, in Sweden of, dock worker unions, like standing in resistance against genocide, against all kinds of injustices. So like taking those examples, seeing how they organize their workplaces, what are they, how they're resisting, how are they becoming more than sort of like just HR departments for whatever corporations they engage with. So I think that's absolutely crucial, like engaging with labor. And also, I guess one point of my book is that universities and academia are also a territory that needs to be a territory of struggle. Like I think there would be a lot more engagement of academics and scientists in many social movements, not just SR, if the pressure, the fear, the amount of time that academics are forced to undertake in things that they often find meaningless would be changed. And I think part of that is democratizing our workplaces and also considering the universities. The struggle is not just in the streets; it's also inside our classrooms, in our labs, in our hallways. So yeah, that's one of the main points of the book.
I was an academic very briefly, very briefly, and I, having been in one of these like really big institutions for an academic year, part of what seemed quite apparent to me by the end was that lots of different people with lots of really important information, not everybody with the really important information about how planet Earth is, fucked, quite frankly, at this stage. And so there's actually a huge number of people within the university, also academics, who just don't know and therefore aren't adding their weight essentially to the battle. I essentially had to push constantly for climate or earth systems to be involved in every single journalism class that I was doing, and was met with resistance for that because, well, why would we do that every single time? Well, why wouldn't we, given we have very few years left to actually do something about it? And like these kids need to know what's going on, and it intersects with everything. And it wasn't that, my colleagues were bad people or whatever. They just didn't know. They didn't know in the way that I knew because I was the climate journalist. And so if I think about all of the academics that are in the humanities or engineering or whatever it is, that will of course know that there's a big problem and will of course read the news. These tend to be educated people, but they don't know the depths of what you know and what your colleagues know. And that might be essentially why they are passive bodies in this, because we need their weight in order to meet management as well and to push against management.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. So another big problem is the extreme siloing of academic institutions. There's a really nice example of sort of a lot of academics from very different departments coming together in the book where I talk about this. It was kind of like a mini climate camp that we carried out before some actions in Germany I think it was in 2022. It was like academics from all fields coming together in this sort of industrial warehouse in the middle of Berlin. And we were discussing like our field or where we were coming from, and in a way that was sort of conducive to change. It was like super interesting. We had like psychologists giving trainings on how to manage our emotions before an action, after an action. You had like more technical people telling us, well, this is how you develop the glue to like stack yourself to the pavement, or this is like the wheat paste that you can put on posters. You had like humanities scholars, you had artists, so we had people like playing music while we were preparing for these actions. And I think these are the same people that are in the university, just in their own little cages, right? So like destroying the barriers that separate people, that prevent this discussion is absolutely important if we want to change. I should also say it's not just academics that need. Academics need to learn from other people that are outside of the ivory tower, from people that have other ways of knowing, that have been fighting these battles for much longer than academics have. Indigenous defenders, local environmental defenders, and that's also something that social movements, I would say, at least in my personal sense, provided me like this window. Is like there's a lot of people that know a lot more than academics about the fucked up problems, that one problem, injustice or massive catastrophe that we're in. And we should be listening to them because they have been fighting these fights for much longer than that. And so with the case of COP right now, like the fact that so many indigenous voices are being kept away from the halls of power, from the halls of discussion. Well, I think it's in 1 in 25 attendees, there's a fossil fuel lobbyist. So it's like,
even though it's been on their land. It's on,
and it's on their, while they're also building a highway on their land as well. It's like, why are we not making university should be more like public libraries where people, they don't have to have these like extraordinary credentials in order to teach something. And there's a lot of things that need to be taught, even to academics themselves, that is not being taught, because we have sort of created this entire like set of cages that we call a university today.
Fernando, what a powerful note to end on. Thank you so much. My final question for you is, who would you like to platform?
Yeah, so I mentioned this book, Insurgent Ecologies. It's published by a collective called Undisciplined Environments. Within there's somebody called Salvatore De Rosa, has a wonderful chapter on where the climate justice movement could be going forwards. I also give you an extra one if you want. There's a fellow scientist activist, Deniso Tochkin, and they have an amazing analysis of another way in which universities and knowledge institutions are sort of being plugged into profit systems, which is sort of technofascism and AI, the AI project as a fascist project. They have a wonderful video on YouTube about this, and I think both of those would be amazing in this podcast.
Amazing. Fernando, thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you want to learn more, I've put links to everything in the description box below. Remember to subscribe to the channel if you're new here and share the episode if you enjoyed it. To support the show, subscribe at planetcritical.com, where you can read the weekly newsletter. You can also become a Planet Critical patron. All links are in the description box below. As always, my deepest thanks to that community. Planet Critical wouldn't exist without your support. Thank you everyone for listening and for coming on this journey together.